If you've watched The Lorax by Illumination, you know how this incredible story of the orange little man teaches a powerful lesson about protecting nature. You might already be aware that the animated film is based on a children's book.
Hey! Oh! Did you chop down this tree?
But did you know this story is inspired by the life of a man who actually existed? And his story had a much darker ending than you could ever imagine. Dr. Seuss wasn't the real name of the book's author. His actual name was Theodore Geisel. The reason he used a pen name was that his stories didn't just upset corporations, they made him a target. This particular book was in fact a critique of a specific group of people who might have posed a real threat to his safety if they discovered his true identity. You see, the Lorax, the magical being who defends nature, was inspired by a tale that Theodore Geisel heard from an old friend. That friend's name was Lombard Raxon, but everyone knew him called him by his nickname, Lorax. Lombard was a fierce protector of nature. He kept a journal that detailed his life and his fight against those who sought to destroy the forest where he lived. And the pages of that journal revealed terrible things that happened, not only to nature, but also to Lorax himself. We're about to share those details with you now, so jump into this wave, because Cinewave is starting. Before diving into the heartbreaking true story that inspired the Lorax, let's take a closer look at the book and its key differences from the film adaptation. The Lorax was written by the incredibly successful children's author known as Dr. Seuss. He was a staunch defender of the environment and wrote the Lorax to teach younger generations the values he believed were crucial. The book tells a story similar to the film, but focuses much more on the Lorax himself. It gives little attention to characters like the Onceler or Ted. In the book, Ted appears only at the very end to receive the seed from the Onceler. Another significant difference is the Onceler's role. In the book, there's no origin story explaining how he became greedy. In fact, we never even see his face. He's a symbolic character representing corporate greed and destructive industries, unlike the more humanized portrayal in the movie. In the Illumination adaptation, the purely villainous role of representing corporations is handed to O'Hare. This character doesn't exist in the book, nor do any of the other city-dwelling characters like those in Ted's storyline. Another key difference is the ending. Both versions end with the Onceler regretting his actions and giving a seed to Ted to fix his mistakes. But while the movie shows Ted planting the seed and sparking hope, the book leaves the ending open. It doesn't reveal whether the seed was planted or if the forest would ever grow back. The book's ending is far less uplifting than the movie's, although it still carries a hopeful message. Sadly, the true story behind the Lorax doesn't have the same kind of optimism. So, are you ready to learn what really happened? Let's go back to Lombard Raxon, or as his friends called him, Lorax. Lombard was well known in the small town where he sold vegetables. Everyone recognized him, not least because of his enormous mustache, which you couldn't miss even from a distance. Lorax lived alone in a forest near that town in a small wooden cabin he built himself. He lived in harmony with nature, growing vegetables and fishing for his meals. One rule Lombard always followed was never to take more from nature than he needed and to protect the forest from anyone who sought to harm it, like hunters who killed animals for sport. Lorax would scare off such people with a shotgun he carried. What they didn't know was that his gun wasn't even loaded. For the most part, his life was peaceful and healthy. But everything changed one morning when he woke up, stepped outside, and saw dozens of men with axes cutting down trees. Naturally, Lorax couldn't just stand by and watch. Grabbing his unloaded shotgun, he confronted the loggers and ordered them to leave. The men, intimidated, had no choice but to flee. The next day, Lombard found a letter at his door. It was from a food company that wanted to clear the forest to make way for large-scale crops. The company offered him a hefty sum of money to stop interfering with their operations and to leave the forest. Being a devoted protector of nature, Lorax refused the offer. He knew that if he left, the forest would be destroyed. The real-life Lorax was every bit as noble as the character in the book and Illumination's film. Do you think the Lorax is as incredible as we do? Comment below with #nature to let us know. Lorax knew the corporation wouldn't give up so easily. Determined to take action, he decided to tell the people in the nearby town about what was happening to the forest, hoping to convince them to protest alongside him. Despite his popularity and charisma, Lorax couldn't persuade anyone to join him. The townspeople didn't take his ideals of protecting nature seriously, thinking he was starting to go overboard. Left with no choice, Lorax resolved to protest on his own and began patrolling the forest with his shotgun, just as he had done the previous day to scare off the loggers. The next day, as expected, the loggers returned. What Lorax didn't expect was that this time, the men came armed with shotguns of their own. Even so, he didn't back down. Lorax shouted at them, issuing threats, empty threats because his gun had no ammunition. He had no intention of harming anyone, he just wanted to scare them off. But the loggers, fed up with his interference, had a different plan. Their shotguns weren't there just to intimidate. One of the men raised his weapon and fired, hitting Lorax in the shoulder. Lorax had never been shot before. The pain was unimaginable, and his scream echoed through the forest, terrifying everyone present. But the loggers didn't stop. They grabbed Lorax, dragged him into his wooden cabin, and set it on fire. Flames consumed the cabin, and Lorax, writhing in agony from the gunshot wound and the burning heat, tragically lost his life after several harrowing minutes. The worst part? Neither the loggers nor the corporation faced any consequences for their heinous actions. The company planted false evidence in Lorax's home, including remnants of homemade bombs, framing him as a dangerous radical. When the police investigated, they concluded that the crazy environmentalist living in the forest had planned to attack the loggers but accidentally set his cabin on fire in the process. As news of the incident spread through the town, people were shocked but accepted the police's version of events. Overnight, Lorax's reputation was destroyed, and he was remembered not as a protector of nature, but as a reckless madman who caused his own demise. Unbeknownst to everyone, there was one person who knew the truth. Robert Brown, one of Lorax's friends who had refused to join his protest, had regretted his decision and went to visit Lorax's cabin to tell him he had changed his mind. When Robert arrived, he witnessed the unthinkable, Lorax being shot and dragged into his cabin, followed by the eruption of flames and the haunting sound of his screams. But with the armed loggers still in the area, Robert could do nothing but hide and watch in horror. After witnessing the atrocity, Robert tried to tell the police what he had seen. However, all he received in return was a chilling threat. The entire town's police force had been bribed by the corporation to turn a blind eye. Robert was forced to live with the truth in silence for decades. He couldn't share what he knew, knowing it could make him a target. Years later, when Robert was an old man, he crossed paths with Theodore Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss. Geisel was visiting the town on vacation and happened to meet Robert sitting on a bench in the park. Curious about the barren land near the town, Geisel asked what had happened to the forest that once stood there. Tired of carrying his secret, Robert told Geisel everything, what Lorax had shared with him and what he had witnessed firsthand. Moved by the story, Dr. Seuss felt compelled to bring Lorax's legacy to life. That's how the Lorax came to be, a tale of a protector of nature silenced by a powerful corporation. While most readers saw it as a charming story about environmentalism, those who had known or heard of Lombard Raxon immediately recognized the name Lorax. They understood that the crazy old man had been wronged by everyone who doubted him. It's comforting to know that in some way the truth of Lombard Raxon's life was shared first through Dr. Seuss's book and now through us. If you want to learn more about the untold stories behind your favorite animated films, subscribe to our channel for daily videos. There's still no absolute certainty that this story actually happened, but it's said that Dr. Seuss, just a few months before his death in 1991, revealed the truth about the origins of his book during a newspaper interview. Unfortunately, that edition of the newspaper has been lost over time and is now considered lost media. This makes it impossible to confirm whether the story is factual or not. Still, many Lorax fans have claimed online that they remember reading the magazine when it was published, which would be a pretty strange coincidence if untrue. The name of the company responsible for what happened to Lorax isn't known. However, people who recall reading the lost interview mention that Dr. Seuss hinted that the corporation eventually went bankrupt. Thankfully, right? It's highly likely that the missing edition of the paper disappeared because of another company trying to prevent the story from gaining popularity. After all, such a story could hurt the image of corporations involved in deforestation. What we do know for sure is that many companies were furious with the message Dr. Seuss aimed to deliver in his book. So much so that in 1995, a company published its own version of the Lorax, titled Truax. In this story, the good guy is Truax, a logger working for a company. The character filling the Lorax's role is a bizarre tree man named Guardbark. Unlike the wise and thoughtful orange mustachioed Lorax, Guardbark is portrayed as dim-witted. The plot revolves around Truax convincing Guardbark that destroying nature is fine. Truax uses absurd arguments to justify his actions, but surprisingly, Guardbark buys into them and leaves happy. The story seems designed to convince children that the Lorax book is over the top. Here's where things get weird. Rumors suggest that one of the loggers involved in the arson that killed Lombard Raxon was named Trevor Umbert. His nickname? Truax. Could this mean the Truax story has ties to the tragic incident in the forest? It's unlikely that the company behind Truax had any direct connection, especially since Dr. Seuss reportedly stated that the corporation responsible for the real-life events went bankrupt. Our theory? Someone involved in the creation of Truax might have intentionally chosen the name as a subtle nod to the incident. That way, anyone familiar with the true story of Lorax would recognize the name and see Truax as a mockery of environmentalism. Who would have thought the origins of the Lorax were tied to so many secrets and dark events? The video's almost over, but we've left 2 amazing videos on your screen for you to enjoy. Just click on one of them to keep the fun going. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.